Esteemed members, good evening. Thank you for joining today's webinar. If you can hear me, just kindly confirm on the chat. Let us know which branch of PSK you're joining us from. If you can hear me, kindly send a message on the chat. Let us know which PSK branch you are from. All right, thank you, Dr. Paul. Thank you, Dr. Kodiwo, Dr. Betty from Nairobi branch, karibuni sana. Dr. Joe from PSK South Rift, Dr. Tom from Central branch, karibuni. All right, thank you, thank you. I see most of the branch are represented. Nyanza branch, Transpokot, Central, Nairobi, karibuni sana, Western. So as we wait for our colleagues to join, I'd encourage you to kindly go to the PPB portal and find this event and subscribe. The keyword is KNPP. So if you just look at my screen, you should be able to see KNPP. And kindly note, there are 3 webinars listed, so ensure that you subscribe to each of them, since this is a 3-webinar series. And also just a reminder, once you've joined this webinar, you don't have to send your email on the chat. All the CPDs are going to be sent since you've already registered for this webinar. So you don't have to send your emails on the chat. Thank you for joining. I see South Rift, Eastern Branch, karibuni sana. Dr. Amon, Dr. Muya. I'm not seeing representatives from Coast Branch. Anyone from Coast Branch? I see North Rift, Dr. Saina, karibu. I see someone from Komesa, Lusaka, Jelita, welcome. Dr. Patrick Muthini, karibu, Lower Eastern. Anyone from Coast Branch? All right, thank you. I see Dr. Jen, welcome from Coast Branch. See someone from Mozambique as well, Dr. Joachim, welcome. All right, thank you. So I'll just briefly take you through the introduction of this session. First, I'd like to welcome you to this webinar. This webinar is on dissemination of Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy Evaluation Report and preparation for submission towards policy review. And this first session is focused on the pharmaceutical policy environment, where we'll be delving on about the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy. So for this session, we'll be having our speakers, Dr. Nancy Njeru, and I'll be assisted in moderating by Dr. Eunice Gathitu. And just a few ground rules to remind you that you are muted during the entire course of this session. So if you have any question, kindly use the Q&A tab so that it will be easy for us to track the questions. And once again, if you've not, kindly ensure that you subscribe to the event on the PPB portal. And the keyword is KNPP. Ensure that you subscribe to the 3 events. So for this session, we'll be having opening remarks by Dr. Tom Menge, and then presentation done by Dr. Nancy Njeru, and then we'll have a Q&A and moderation done by Dr. Eunice Gathitu. So just a few minutes till it reaches 7:10. And for those who have joined, kindly ensure that you subscribe before we start the session. All right, so at this point, I'd like to welcome Dr. Eunice, who's going to be the moderator for the session. So, Dr. Eunice, if you can hear me, welcome.
Yes. Thank you, Hezron, and good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Gavitu. I work in Ministry of Health, Directorate of Health Products and Technologies. And I would like to invite Dr. Menge to give opening remarks before we proceed with the session. Welcome, Director.
Thank you very much, Eunice, and thank you, PSK, for making this possible. I want to confirm that I'm audible.
Yes, you are.
Yes, you are.
Thank you very much. All of us may be aware or not that we've been having the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy. That was a sessional paper that was approved by Cabinet way back in 2012, which means that for us, this the policy that has been
We have lost you.
Dr. Nancy, can you hear Dr. Tom? Well, I see he's dropped.
No, we can't
Okay,
hear you.
okay, I see he's dropped. Maybe, yeah, he's back again.
Okay.
So sorry about that. I believe you can now hear me.
Yes,
Yes.
you can.
Okay, so we started a process of finding out how far or how much of the pharmaceutical policy has been implemented. And therefore, we linked up with the Pharmaceutical Society of Kenya to agree that we'll go through a 3-session process. And the first session will be carried out by Dr. Nancy Njeru, will be coming by shortly, to just take us through the process of policy review and what did we do. The session next week, I'll be managing it, where we'll have an opportunity to share our findings from the policy review, how much of it do we consider has been implemented, and which method did we use to establish what percentage of the policy has been implemented. The final session, and I think you'll also be shared with this, is an interactive session. We want to get feedback. So I believe that after today's session, we'll be able to share with you the report of the situation analysis of the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy for you to interact with, so that by the time we are having a similar session next week, we will be able to then, we believe that most of us will have had an opportunity to go through it. So I welcome you to this series of seminars, and I want to encourage you that this is something that is of interest to all pharmacists. And I believe that as many of us should be able to participate as possible, so that you are aware about the situation analysis and what other steps we have for the process of review. So thank you very much, and I wish you a good listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Menge. So at this point, I want to invite Dr. Nancy Njeru. Please introduce yourself, Nancy, and proceed with the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eunice. I've tried to put my video so that at least colleagues, you can see me. Good evening, colleagues. So I'll be making the presentation today. Allow me to share it. Please confirm that you can see.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I think with that, I'll introduce myself. I'm Dr. Nancy Jeru. I also work at the Ministry of Health in the Directorate of Health Products and Technologies. I head a division called HPT Management and Logistics, and I'm happy to take you through this work today. Allow me to put off my video, and so that I'm able to continue with the presentation. Oh, Munyakin, you are able to do that for me?
Sorry?
You're able to put off the video for me?
Yes, I can do that.
Okay, that will be good. So welcome, colleagues, and thank you once more. I'll be able to take you through the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy, Session 4, Sessional Paper 4 of 2012. And our focus is on the dissemination of the findings of its evaluation 10 years after it was put in place. And through this dissemination, we are keen that we'll be able to take you through the process so that you're able to get submissions from yourselves that will inform the next review. Of course, policy issues and concerns that need to be addressed by the policy. So this dissemination process aims at ensuring that you get to know how well or how much of the KNPP has been implemented so far. And through that, we are also able to engage through these sessions to even appreciate more of the challenges that are in the sector. And also, most importantly, is just a snapshot of the policy-making process that we understand what we are about to go through when we embark on reviewing this policy to put another policy in place. And so, just like I've said, we'll be able to get at least policy options from you and all the other stakeholders that you'll be engaging in. So looking at this slide, we are on session 1. And as we go through that, kindly we call on you to be keen to follow through to session 3, so that you'll be able to get all the details. This slide, this presentation this evening will be in around 4 parts. The first one being the policy making process, just as a list of understanding that. Another section, which will be a bit longer, is one that will look at what the KNPP 2012 put in place for us. And that will be good because some of us who have not been able to read that document, will be able to take you through that, so that in the next sessions, you'll have already appreciated it. After that, we'll be able to take you through a short process on how we planned ourselves to evaluate it. And then we give the fourth bit is where we'll be looking at a very summarized a snippet of what were the top level findings in that policy evaluation process. So looking at the introduction to policy making in Kenya, we do have a guideline on actually guideline on policy making process. And there are some key questions that we need to ask ourselves, especially what is a public policy. We need to appreciate, some of us may have gone through this, but some may not have interacted with the policy making process. Who makes public policies? Why are they made? And why is public policy even needed? Types of public policies, and even the stages in making these policies and passing them even to a bill. Some policies become acts, and some of you are aware of that. So in general, a policy is a purposeful statement written or spoken. Some policies can be in form of circulars. They can be in form of big documents like what we are seeing in the KNPP, or just statements. And we make them in our institutions and even in the public sector. And so when you look at the public policy, allow me to read verbatim. It's a purposeful and consistent course of action produced and pursued by the government as a response to a perceived problem of a sector. And this is formulated through specific political process. We do actually have guidelines. It's adopted and implemented and enforced by a public agency. You cannot make a policy that there's nobody to enforce it. And so we'll be able to look at that. These strengths give some attributes of a public policy, and it's very critical that there's demand side, what are the issues that must be addressed, and on this other side, there's somebody who is making it on behalf of the public. And we make this policy like KNPP on behalf of the pharmaceutical sector to guide that sector. Interestingly, when you look at the stakeholders, and I know as pharmacists and the members of PSK, whom I'm a member, we are some of the professional bodies mentioned here, very critical in not only implementing this KNPP, but also advocating for its implementation by other institutions and other stakeholders that we collaborate together. So it's a very critical policy for us. We are critical stakeholders, and you can see all the other stakeholders beginning from parliament, the government, the media, the citizens themselves. And when you start making a policy is when you realize that it's affecting so many other people. So for us here, this is a critical policy that guides everything we do. Regarding the policy making process, it's actually a 4-step process beginning with agenda setting, formulating the policy itself, implementing it, evaluating it. And that cycle may seem simple, being a 4-stage step. But when you look at the context within which the policy is made, it can become very lengthy, like we'll see how long it took to make the KNPP and put it in place. There are many contexts, global. For instance, now when you look at UHC, there's a lot of UHC agenda globally, and it's impacting how we are doing it also. When you look at the things like the political context, economic context, for example, when this KNPP was being made, so that's the same time when the Vision 2030 was being put in place around 2006. So there's a lot of aspects that happen, and you're able to see even what it speaks to. So it's important to look at the context when a policy is being made, and we'll even be able to see in the evaluation how some of these contexts affected how the KNPP was implemented. Regarding types of public policies, there are 4 of them: distributive, redistributive, regulatory, stabilization. Without leading in details, if you look at the stabilization policies, they are deliberate changes in government policy instruments in response to changing macroeconomic conditions, and they aim to stabilize the economy. For example, when we had COVID-19, there were some economic recovery policies by the government. I would like, especially those who have read, you'll be able to see, maybe you'll be able to tell us where the KNPP falls in when you look at these 4 types. Of course, it may not be a clear-cut fit, but at least you can tell when you look the wider, the bigger part of it, on which side maybe it falls in, and that's something you can have even in the discussions. Looking at the features of a good public policy, and we can be able to actually even evaluate KNPP based on this. There are several of them, as you can see: cross-cutting, outward-looking, forward-looking, but most importantly, evidence-informed among them. And even when you'll be requesting for submissions from yourselves, the problem that is being raised must be backed by evidence. So it's very important. A policy is supposed to be known and visible. I don't know how much of the KNPP is known to us members, but I'm glad we have this great opportunity to interact with it. So that first part was more of sensitizing us into what is a public policy, so that now we can get into the policy itself. And it's interesting because this KNPP 2012 one, perhaps the next one will we are lucky that we may be able to participate.
Nancy, your sound
Yes?
is disappearing. We are losing you.
My sound is off.
It's coming on and off.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you. Maybe
Okay,
just
thank you.
do the slide again. The current
Yes,
one.
it's good to do the slide again, because I was just mentioning that between 1994 and 2012, there was some 18 years in between. And to get an opportunity to review a policy, is not an opportunity that comes every other day. So we are keen on participating in this one as members of PSK so that we can be able to influence what will be guiding us in the next several years. Today, it's 12 years since KNPP was put in place. Perhaps if we begin today, its review, it might take some few other years, but this is a very critical framework that informs the pharmaceutical sector. And we'll be able to see how it was formulated in this next slide. You can see this began in 2006 with formation of a TWG. Interestingly, within 1 year, the technical team had been able to submit this document to the leadership for approval. But you can see it took up to 2012 for it to be put in place. And this also is affected by some of the processes. If you look in 2008, when the government was in 2 ministries, they had to resubmit it once more. So that is interesting. And look at some of the assumptions that this policy was making. Being called a national pharmaceutical policy, it was also assuming that all the other HPT categories, it will be able equitably adaptable to them. And it was also assuming that the critical pharmaceutical sector issues cut across the building blocks. If you have been able to read it, speaking to all the building blocks of the health system as we know them, financing, health information systems, infrastructure, service delivery, governance, very key, and all that. The other assumption is that there will be robust implementation structures for its implementation. And we'll be able to see this, especially governance structures, some of which if we are not put in place, they may not really be implementable. Again, another assumption was the aspect of dynamism and flexibility. This is one of the policies that has been implemented in a very difficult, complex time with a lot of rapid changes. You remember devolution just immediately after it was put in place, 2013, there was devolution, heavy devolution of the health sector. We've also witnessed the health financing and service delivery reforms, UHC, PHC, SHA, for those who have seen that, and the healthcare reforms, and also the COVID-19. And we'll be able to see, was it really flexible enough to be able to handle and remain relevant in such a situation? So looking at the details of it, this is one of the longer slides, because we'll be able now to go pillar by pillar and see what was raised. There are 7 pillars in the Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy 2012. And in each pillar, the challenges that were bedeviling the sector, very strong background was put in place, and even the challenges well defined, and what is required to be done, including the institutional and legal arrangement that needed to be put in place to solve the challenges. And if you look at it, it cuts across from governance, aspects of regulation, the actual availability of medicines, the industry and the manufacturing areas, aspects of affordability and the pricing, appropriate use, research, health information, ICT, human resources, aspects of pharmaceutical trend, and also the veterinary medicines. So it was really encompassing. And finally, financing. And we'll be able to go through each one of them in details. One interesting thing about these lines and the pillars, you can see it starting either uncoordinated, lack of these. And so that statement, if we say weak governance, what do we mean by that? And the next slides are going to show that. Like when you look at number 5, affordability of essential medicines. And this is speaking to unregulated prices. I don't know whether I've lost. You can see the slides? Confirm you can see the slides.
We can see, just go ahead, Nancy.
Oh, I thought I'd gotten lost. I was just giving an example of number 5, high unregulated prices of essential medicines. And we'll be able to see what specifically did that mean. So I'll not be necessarily read this through, because I know in the next lines now we are getting to it. When you say inadequate or lack of this, lack of public financing for essential medicine, inadequate financing for public for essential medicines. What do we mean by that? And I think that is where we will spend most of the time this evening, appreciating what were the challenges that were being addressed, so that when we come to score in the next sessions, we'll be able to see how far we have gone. Starting with Pillar 1, and interestingly, you can see this one as 6 policy action areas that needed to be dealt with. And governance is very critical. There was low placement of the pharmaceutical issues within the governance structures. And I believe that is at the Ministry of Health, where there was that aspect of weak prioritization of the policy. And when that happens, it really affects many other aspects. And you can see the governance structures, even oversighting the pharmaceutical sector was a big challenge. This affects even how well the pharmaceutical sector is coordinated, leading to a lot of fragmentation. And the challenges of governance really are critical. And even when you continue with the session, you'll be able to see that governance is very key. When the center is also weak, the aspect of what is devolved down once again, you can look at number 4, the formal devolved structures within the facilities and other institutions is also as weak. And when also there are weak structures within like the ministry, which is the leading in policy processes, again, oversighting the private sector and other stakeholders becomes a very big challenge, including how we participate in national and international region regarding pharmaceuticals. You'll find interestingly that when governance is affected, the other pillars, issues become more and more. Like now here we have 12 areas in matters regarding the regulation of health products, starting with the number 1, conflict of roles of key government offices. And when there is conflict, of course, the weak central authority for pharmaceuticals in terms of how PPB was working with other mandated bodies, CAPs, and all others. When there are conflicts or some unclear areas, some of the regulatory gaps are seen. Again, aspects of outdated management structures for purposes of regulation, increasing globalization and sophistication of the pharmaceutical sector. And when that happens, the issues of crime and counterfeiting and illegal trade was one flagged out issue. And you can see also the challenges in how the regulator was financed. And not just the regulator in terms of financing, but also the human resources and the regulatory capacity of for HPT. And that also extended to the traditional and alternative medicines. That were also, a lot of coming up, but there was no clear regulation for that. Number 8 is speaking to inadequate framework for ensuring the quality control for pharmaceuticals, pharmacologically relevant products. When we speak to medicine, but also nutraceuticals and the traditional alternative medicines, there was weakness in how they were regulated, also practice, not just the products, but also the personnel themselves and the practice. And you'll be able to see some of the interventions that were proposed. The issues of the legal framework to exploit the other opportunities in Kenya and the region were a challenge that was highlighted, especially in terms of quality control for products, because these products must have the best quality to be able to compete both in Kenya and in the region with other market players. So these are some of the challenges that were highlighted, including the mechanisms for collaboration with other regulators. Harmonization has been an issue all along, and you can see it was clearly flagged out in this area, and also aspects of the inspectors and personnel who do and carry out drug inspections. So that's an area of regulation. And those are in those points that I've pointed there, you'll be able to see how we are scoring as of today. In Pillar 3, it was speaking to the availability of essential medicines, another area with several challenges, right from how we finance, allocate resources, disburse them, and even procure essential medicines. It was a challenge then, and it was flagged out. Aspects of parallel procurements, different players doing different procurements, and how aspects of institutions like KEMSA needed to be strengthened to carry out that capacity. best practices in distribution, in procurement, that are really critical in ensuring medicines are available. Look at the aspects of the budget lines for HPT and how well they are prioritized and are used to ensure that medicines are available for the Kenyans. Aspects of the non-public actors having essential medicines and the collaborations that we are able to have, even when facilities are not able to procure from KEMSA, are there really mechanisms? And you can see that this was flagged out as a challenge, that when they are stockouts in KEMSA, how do we enable the HR capacity in supply chain and logistics and procurement area not being adequate to be able to meet the needs for medicines to be available in the country, capacities for procurement of HPT during emergencies. We know that when we have challenges during routine procurement, it even becomes harder during emergency procurement. And that's a big challenge as they have been highlighted. Coming to the retail outlets, again, most of them are in the urban areas, but the vulnerable groups in the rural areas, you find they're not able to access our pharmacy outlets. Again, something that had been highlighted, including how we practice in those areas and the ethical practices, proliferation of some of the outlets that are not either unregulated and you don't know what is happening there in those outlets when they are not regulated. Again, how KEMSA status in terms, today is an authority, but by then it had been flagged as a weakness in being able to meet the needs for HPT in the country. And again, the issue of coordination of the procurement agencies. That was pillar 3. And when you look at pillar 4, it's speaking to local pharmaceutical production. And the issues are just becoming heavy and heavy once governance is affected. In here, 9 issues were flagged out, including the regulation of the pharmaceutical industry. And you can see the issue of overregulation was cited. Issues of production, inputs of production, very costly. Both inputs and also compliance with aspects such as GMP compliance, how well we accept the generics that we produce. Most of the time, the public has very low preference for generics. And that is what all our local manufacturers are doing. Lead challenges that were critical aspects of technology transfer, and how well we are adopting the opportunities availed through the TRIPS, the trade-related intellectual property rights that can be exploited to ensure we have more with stronger capacity. The other aspect of GMP compliance, I think, was weak, and our products within the country were not able to really compete effectively in other markets, with a lot of donor-funded programs even getting products outside where our local manufacturers could not compete. Today, if somebody was to put a local manufacturing plant, what are the barriers to this? And you can see the policy and flagged out an issue of both legal and administrative barriers in this process. And finally, the specialized pharmaceutical personnel to be able to support the local industry. Colleagues, you can see the issue of affordability and accessibility is really having a lot of concerns. And when you look at pillar 5, that spoke to how affordable medicines were, high prices were flagged, and I'm sure there's a challenge. We'll be able to see how well it has been resolved. But we still have a lot of challenges with the medicines informations. How well the public, especially the vulnerable, are able to acquire medicines. There's a lot of out-of-pocket expenditures in health. And actually, most of the people who are affected are the vulnerable in society. And we didn't have strong mechanism to cushion them from these challenges. And also the lack of pricing policies for the country, because you realize beyond the production costs, there are those other aspects of the markups that are loaded into the process. So you will find different geographical variations, and including how the procurement entities, the prices they are realizing in the process, because there's no clear, pricing policy in the process for the country. So that had been flagged out. And some of the processes that are supposed to even make medicines more affordable, like when you speak to the generic prescribing concepts, it was found to be low. But in an area where there's a lot of, promotion of branded products, and that aspect now, you find it's very difficult to make the prices of medicines affordable. And again, if you look at the issue of the not able to have an authoritative information on quality of medicines in the market, because of those challenges of prices not being open, information asymmetry, of course, the manufacturers and the people who are involved in the trade have more information than the others. So these are some of the challenges that are making the products very unaffordable. Number 6 is an interesting one, speaking to the conflicting registration. I think that time, if you read back, for some of us who are able to really, another lot of documents in this process, there was an Anti-Counterfeit Act 2009 that had almost, put generic as, as not good medicines, and there was a movement then speaking to generics are not counterfeits. So some of those conflicting registration had been highlighted as some of the challenges that were affecting affordability. There is, I'm not able to see the, let me open, sorry. In terms of Pillar 6, you can see there were many issues that were highlighted as challenges. And this is about the appropriate use of medicines. And the policy did not leave out the traditional medicines. And it was quite inclusive. It's coming from medicines, traditional medicines, nutraceuticals, and all that. And looking at how we rationalize, there were challenges in how we coordinate medicines use strategies at the facility levels and also at the national level, and lack of implementation of the appropriate medicine use. The issue of how regularly we review the standard treatment guidelines that guide appropriate medicine use. These are very critical clinical governance structures in the use of medicines was not there. But even when they are there, are they being adhered to by the prescribers? And when medicines are being promoted, are we really even able to use what we have already highlighted in our essential medicines list? Again, issues that were flagged out when it comes to aspects that were affecting information and promotion of medicines. There were challenges because of weak regulation of the sale and promotion of medicines. And you know what promotion does and how it affects the appropriate use. Again, the proliferation of the use of ICT in medicines and e-medicine, where there were no such laws maybe to even regulate how that was happening. And this was not just for medicines alone. You can see even traditional practitioners sometimes are very strong in promoting themselves and speaking about what they do. And some of this information may not even be documented very well. Aspects of lack of information centers where even providers and the citizenry can be able to get information about drugs. So all that was affecting the appropriate use. And again, who are the personnel who are prescribing? Sometimes we don't have the effective personnel prescribing, but also even the dispensers sometimes are not qualified. So those are issues that were being highlighted. I think I've spoken to the aspect of self-medication when prices go high and patients are trying to, try to cut short and cut the cost. So these challenges were really an issue. If you look at number 5, weak collaboration between the regulator and professional association like ourselves, PSK, how well we are collaborating to enhance self-regulation. So these were issues that were affecting use of medicines. Again, there were no policies around traditional medicines use, as you can see. And going to Pillar 7, promotion of research, it's an interesting area where it was even felt that there was limited, and recognition of quality research in the area of pharmaceuticals. And the challenges with how we finance that area, legal frameworks to guide it, even the capacities in terms of infrastructure, the HR, and people who have the knowledge to be able to conduct research. And we'll be able to see how we are faring today. The area of ICT is interesting with 3 issues raised, largely around the legal frameworks to guide ICT, how well we are embracing ICT to bring about the efficiency in service delivery, and whether we are even investing enough and allocating enough resources into this area. A very interesting area. In terms of human resources, whom are ourselves, and we are very critical for the service delivery, the numbers were flagged as an issue, and not just the numbers, but also the skills, and the changing role of the pharmacists in the healthcare setting is also another interesting area, which the policy sought to address how we are distributed in the facilities, urban versus rural, private versus public, how the specialties are recognized. Some of the mechanisms for upgrading from diploma to degree, again, were highlighted. And we may be struggling with some of these issues, we may not. And all that is subject to how well the KNPP was implemented or not. When it comes to the area of promoting access and safeguarding public health in pharmaceutical trade, a very interesting area, because it was felt that not much enough attention was being given to the pharmaceuticals in the context of how they are cross-cutting aspects of multi-sectoral international trade and trade negotiations, how much we are capacitated to be able to do that. And again, also conflicting registration, like the one I mentioned of the counterfeit, and looking at generic as counterfeits, aspects of the harmonization, to be able to have a product in Kenya be able to be recognized across the country, the countries within the regions. So those are some of the issues that were highlighted there. Veterinary medicine, interesting area, because what we are doing within the pharmaceutical sector, it was envisioned that, again, we'll apply the human medicines at a period. There were a lot of, overuse and abuse that is reported in the policy, and a lot of prevalence of antimicrobial residues in human food. We know about the issue of antimicrobial resistance. And this was an area which was felt it was not regulated. And again, just like we see in pharmaceuticals, the proliferation of those unregulated players. Interestingly, number 7 was noting that veterinary surgeons are able to not only do the diagnosis, but treat and even administer the same drugs. Not what happens with the pharmaceuticals, at least we try to have that oversight and separation of roles. But again, that, as you can see, was flagged out. I'm trying to go through first into these pillars. And the final pillar was 12 on financing for essential pharmaceuticals. Very critical, looking at how there was inadequate, of course, allocation for essential medicines. And this money can be moved from one to another. You may be allocated a certain amount, but at the end of the year, you're not able to get it because it was not ring-fenced. And even what we are charging in our health facilities, when we try to bring issues of cost sharing and user fees, again, there are those disadvantaged people in the community who cannot be able to afford. How do we protect them from these out-of-pocket expenditures? We've spoken a lot to the issue of insurance. I know even PSK has really been following up how some of these medicines can be covered in SHA. And you can see it was flagged out again in 2012. Interesting areas. And these are some of the challenges, including how well are we efficient in utilizing the budgets that we have. So for somebody who had not maybe read through the policy that was shared, Those are some of the issues that were raised, supported a lot with the background information. And those are the ones that led to the policy actions that we set to evaluate how far we were 10 years after during the implementation. So they implemented through 5-year strategic plans. Remember, this was a policy. So every 5 years, a strategy is put in place to be able to implement it, and a lot of effort to align it with other strategies in the sector, particularly the Vision 2030 MTP plans, the sector strategic plans, but also see how other ministry and departments and agencies where we collaborate with are incorporating it into their work. And also, of course, with the reviews. This KNPP and been said to be reviewed within 10 years. And we are glad that we were able to review it in 2022. After 10 years, it was put in place in 2012. So we set ourselves to review KNPP. And it was an interesting journey because I'm sure even you, after looking at all that, you are interested to know what came out of it. And specifically, we wanted to know, was it still relevant, to what extent the policy scope, principles, and objectives, remained relevant in the evolving needs of the sector, just like I mentioned, evolution, COVID-19, the immense policy reforms, how effective it was. And so the evaluation period was between 2012 and 2022. And we went through this in 4 steps, which I'm going to describe next, right from planning. And during planning, we came up with the terms of reference for a steering committee. I am glad I had an opportunity to chair this committee. We also came up with the TORs for a consultant, and through the Director General, we were able to appoint a members to the steering committee and also recruit a consultant through an implementing partner. And I'm glad at this point even to say that Dr. Menge, the current head of Directorate of HPT, was also had the great opportunity to be our consultant then before he came to join us. So it's been a very interesting journey. And so that was the planning phase. In the second phase, we looked at the desk review of many documents in the sector, scanning around for all the documents that were speaking to the issues in the policy, where the regarding implementation across the sectors and within the Ministry of Health, so that we're able to see most of the work that had been done, looking at published reports and documents and from all the government areas. We were able to document all that and look at what had been done and completed, what was in the progress, and what even had not even started. And we did that using a standard tool that we developed. So in each area, we gave scores based on what had been, implemented. And for each section, like I've taken you through, if there were 10 or 12 policy actions, each was scored and an average of each was given per pillar. So you're able to see how well each pillar performed, and you'll be able to see that in the next session. And as I progress, in case you don't hear me, you can alert me. The other phase was data collection, again within the phase 2. We are beyond just looking at the documents and carrying out an extensive desk review. We were able to talk to some people in the sector, and I know maybe some of you may have participated in that. And we developed a tool. Per pillar, we were able to identify all the partners, and beyond that, we tried to put the different pillars into 6 thematic areas that you'll be able to see next week. And so we were able to take the key informant interview participants, either physically or through virtual meetings. Again, this information was collected and put together. We have even recordings of this, and the steering committee was very committed in carrying out that work. The Secretariat remained the Directorate of HPT, and this information was used to beef up the report that we'll be sharing with you. We also carried out a peer review of the report. The desk review and key informant reports were separately reviewed by the Secretariat and even the steering committee, and were able to align well. We faced several limitations, and even as you read and interact with this document, especially where we come to what was done and what was not done, and I know the person taking you through the session next week will be able to mention that some of the content may not be available in the public. For example, if I've done scheme of service for pharmacists or pharmaceutical technologists, where do I find that document? Sometimes it's not in the MOH website. You don't know whether it was done. And maybe when you're interacting with the people, it's when you hear, oh, this actually was done. And it was very interesting. And we'll be able to even see more as we engage with you in this process. It's good that I'm in the last bit of this presentation. I hope I'm not very fast, Munyakin.
No, you're doing well, Dr.
It is well.
Yes.
This is the interesting bit, and it is the final part. And it just gives you a snippet of what we found, a very high level. The details of it is what you'll be able to see next session. And interestingly, when you looked at the KNPP and evaluated it to the end, we found it very forward-looking. I remember when I was saying the attributes of a good policy, and relevant up to today. Allow me to move this as Sabah, which is, yes. We still found it very forward-looking and still applicable in 2023, 11 years later. That was our conclusion after reading through that document and evaluating it in terms of how well it addressed the issues and how flexible and adaptable it was through the challenges and the turbulence that the health sector has gone through since when it was put in place. Number two issue that we highlighted is that though the policy was recognizing HPT in general, though it's called pharmaceutical policy, and assumed that the principles applied in pharmaceuticals will cater across all the other categories. And actually it is stated pharmaceuticals were the core HPT specifically. When we went to evaluate this, we found that the other product category actors, when you look at lab, when you look at nutrition, when you look at other products, dental, across board, they did not identify with the policy at all. They would say to you, your policy. That was very interesting. Number three, we noted that this policy was non-self-executing. A self-executing policy, once it's put in place today, by tomorrow you'll be able to start implementing without anything else required. But for the KNPP, there were several institutions that were to be put in place for it to be said it's been implemented. Look at the issue of establishing the KDA, aspects of ensuring institutions like KEMSA, PBB, NQCL were having the relevant, the requisite autonomy to be able to operate, and moving KEMSA from an agency, it used to be a store in a Ministry of Health a long time ago, to an authority it is today. Very critical processes that require registrations for it to be implementable. Again, the issue of separating the product and practice and putting in place a pharmacy council for the regulation of the professionals. And all these were very interesting. We noted that out of all those institutions, it's only KEMSA that became an authority as expected in 2013. All the other institutions that had been set for strengthening have not happened up to the point we're evaluating the policy. Very interesting because, again, if you remember when I was taking through about the policy making process, the implementation structures are very critical. Number three was interesting. We noted that when we were reviewing the KNPP, the National Pharmaceutical Policy 2012, and again, the Health Act was speaking together about reducing fragmentation in how health products are regulated in the country. In fact, it was proposed a single regulatory body for HPT, very critical in the Health Act. at the point we are evaluating this policy in December 2022, we realized that the Kenya Nuclear Regulatory Authority, for those of you who know it, and the Kenya Tissue and Transport Authority were actually being established. I think KNRA is actually in place. So those are some of the challenges we found. Number 5, very, very sad that KNPP was done in 2012. And by 2013, there was massive devolution of the health sector. And the pharmacy was one of the devolved services. For those who remember what was happening around 2013. So instead of this policy having several strategic plans for implementation, only one strategy was put in place in 2020. Again, this would have impacted a lot how the implementation happened. Number 6, leadership and governance. I mentioned it again. It was envisioned that the Director of Pharmaceutical Services was to be put in place at the same level of the Director of Medical Services, so that the issues of the sector could be, done well. But what happened is that in 2013, when devolution happened, the pharmacy services were completely devolved. And in the Ministry of Health organogram, there was no pharmacy department like used to be before. For 7 years, up to 2019, is when we got the Division of Health Products and Technology put in place, of course, at a very lower level. And these 7 years of, lacuna really affected how we have implemented this policy, and we'll be able to see that must have affected in a big way. Finally, as I conclude, I have 2 slides now, this one and the last one. The KNPP 2012 did not have a monitoring and implementation plan. There were no KPIs we were monitoring, and even this affected how we were evaluating. It was not constant. No midterm review was done. We don't even know whether it was disseminated after devolution happened. We don't know where we may have missed, but at least the document was in place. So that one also, again, affected a lot, how it was being monitored, but somehow we managed to find a way of scoring it. Interestingly, there's a lot that has happened in the sector, especially attributable to the reforms, attributable to the lessons we learned in 2019, how it has impacted the local manufacturing agenda to appoint the president as mandate and directive, issues of ML3 and the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. So we realized that some components of KNPP actually have been implemented, but you are not able to link it directly to the policy itself. They may have been very distinct and independent, but you don't know, we'll be able to judge as we look at this process. Finally, we noted that some of the policy interventions were not smart, to say the least. Smart for what we look at it from of when you're designing objectives. And we noted that ones like encourage this, encourage that, do not say much. They don't actually demonstrate an authoritative, action by government on what should be done and what should not be done. And these are just high-level summary. And in the next sessions, we'll be able to get deeper into what was happening per pillar, per action, and how each action, policy action, to say, really scored. I'm very glad that you've listened to me this evening, and allow me to stop at that and take it back to Dr. Eunice Gaditu.
Thank you, Nancy, for the presentation. And there are a few questions I'm seeing on the Q&A and on the chat. So on the Q&A, there's a question about whether there's a policy on the rates that pharmacists are to be paid when engaged on a locum basis, like medical officers. Can you answer each on its own, Nancy?
How many are they?
So on the Q&A, there are 2. The other question is, who was envisaged to oversee implementation of KNPP 2012?
Yes.
Yeah, maybe answer those first, then we look at the chat.
Okay, thank you for that. I think I'll start with the one on the paying pharmacists when on locum, like happens with the KMPTC. I think for that, I know it's not directly under the ministry, it's more about the regulator, particularly the Pharmacy and Poisons Board. And I would request anybody who has more of that detail to mention, but it's something that we should be able to pursue with the regulator. The other aspect in terms of who was supposed to implement KNPP, definitely it was the developers. This is a document that was developed by the Ministry of Health and in collaboration with all stakeholders and professionals and the consumers of that policy. So the Ministry of Health, Department of Pharmacy, which then was reporting directly to the DMS, and which was being envisioned to become a directorate at par, Director of Medical Services, Director of Pharmaceutical Services, at par with the DMS, is the one that was continue to disseminate and implement this policy. And I think when you look at what I was taking you through, what happened between 2013 and 2019, where there was a gap in the governance structures, we're not even able to do a strategy, even one strategy to implement. And the first strategy was done when the Division of Health Products and Technologies was recreated again after a lot of lobbying and a lot of work of some of the people who are here can speak much more to that than me. And that's when it was put in place in 2019, and you can see we're able to do the strategy. And right now, being a directorate, we are even able to do much more. So yes, it was still the same department that was supposed to implement.
Thank you, Nancy. Then on the chat, before I go back to the Q&A tab, so someone asked about, they recently attended the Community Health Information System brief with specific interest in the CHP kit. So there's a question of what does KNPP envision regarding the CHP kit, which has medicines and other supplies. The other question tied to that is, will the policy touch?
Yes.
I'm not able to touch on the distribution of medicines to facilities. Then the other same question from the same person. What about training for CHPs on handling basic medicines and medical supplies? Then the issue of documentation and record keeping by the CHPs.
Yes.
So you can answer that, then we address others.
Okay, thank you, Eunice. The issue of CHPs and the community health has come as part of the reforms, the sweeping reforms that have been happening in the health sector, right from financing, but also service delivery, and a lot of it linked to ensuring access to essential medicines and other essential services. And you hear today we are speaking to PCNs, community rolling, delegating or more of decentralizing products up to the community level. So when you look at the KNPP, it was very forward-looking. And it had flagged out issues of non-authorized prescribers. I think it was also looking at how we prescribe in our public facilities, even at the lower levels, level 2 and 3, but also looking at unauthorized dispensers of medicines. And perhaps this issue is just alluding to the fact that we may not have maybe tackled that issue, we may have worsened than when we envisioned how to curb it in 2012. And also even moving forward, how well some of these issues are being enforced or have been enforced, and how well even the human resources in terms of numbers and skills in pharmaceuticals have been enhanced and effectively deployed to some of these areas up to the community level to supervise and oversee this work. And I believe when we start going now forward to formulating the next policy, we should be able to pick some of these areas as policy options and policy issues that need to be addressed. But Eunice, for me to finalize is just to say that this could be some of the areas maybe we've not been able to tackle, much as the policy clearly was able to flag them as challenges the sector was facing.
Thank you, Nancy. The other question is, someone commented that this could be an opportunity to include the pharmacy benefit package. And maybe to tie to that, there's another question of whether we can define, given that prescribing is one of the responsibilities of a pharmacist, what can the policy define that further, and how should the compensation structure for such services look like? Maybe
The
you can answer
compensation
the two together.
structures in the insurance.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And I'm glad already the problems, the policy problems are already being identified. And I know we are the ones with the answers to this, and we would want to see them even put in policies if they are not able to be addressed administratively. But in terms of compensating pharmacies for both the services and the products, again, allow me to keep referring back to the policy because it really flagged out that issue of low coverage of insurance, and particularly lack of coverage of essential medicines in insurance. We are at a point where we have put in place a technical working group to start defining the pharmacy benefit package to be addressed through SHA, and I'm sure PSK, our is it mother and father, can allude to that they are members of this. And you can see this is happening post 10 years after the policy was put in place. And when you will be scoring, you'll also be able to see that those are some of the areas that scored 0 because you have not done anything about it. But the review really was an eye-opener even for us, even to see what are some of the areas maybe had fallen through the gaps. But I'm glad for what is happening. And I don't want to start bringing what the next session will address. But yes, that process is in place. And what will be compensated, it is us to define. And I'm glad at this point in time, we are part of the process.
Okay, thank you, Nancy. And again, some few other questions. So from Moirimo, she says that she's glad that to strengthen policy, a director of pharmaceutical services was proposed that validates our thoughts and strategy on ensuring pharmacy is seen more as a service and not just commodity management role only. What are the challenges towards this, and what is needed to make this a reality? So that's one. Maybe let me tackle several so that you can answer. Then Dr. Birichi asks the identification and engagement of key stakeholders. How conclusive was it? Dr. Riongo asks what the name of the new policy will be. A question on what would be the role of PSK in achieving the policy. Maybe address those as I look at other questions.
Thank you, Eunice. I think the questions are very beautiful. And I'm happy because we have come to you as critical stakeholders. So that at the end of this, when you disseminate these policies, some of us were not involved in making it, but we really appreciate how far it has guided us. We will be able to get from you the policy issues and how we should address them. And when I look at some of the questions, Director of Pharmaceutical Services, I know it's something we are keen on seeing and how it is being addressed right now. What are the challenges? There's a lot of policy direction and redirection. You are in the pharmacy department. There's speaking to health products and technologies directorate, while others are looking at the pharmaceutical, pharmaceutical directorate, and these are some of the policy directions that are taking place in the context that we are in, because we have many stakeholders in this process. But how we want to view it will really be determined by the steps we are going to take forward in reviewing the policy. But some of these processes is like they have already been determined. We are now speaking to the Directorate of Health Products and Technologies and bringing all products on board. In terms whether it's a challenge or not, it will also depend on how we interpret it. But I believe when we do the next policy, we'll be able to address a lot of issues around it. And that also actually ties to the issue of what will the new policy be called. The first one was Kenya Drug Policy 1994. The second one, Kenya National Pharmaceutical Policy 2012. The next one, we will be making submissions to this. And I don't want to preempt because we have come to as stakeholders so that we walk this journey together. So I'll be able to leave it at that. The other question, Eunice, you've spoken to the issue of identification of key stakeholders in the process. It was a very comprehensive process identifying every stakeholder in the HPT subsector and even beyond, right, from the national, county governments, partners, and both at the implementation level, development partners and institutions. And you may not have been reached perhaps in the steering committee, but in terms of dissemination, we know that we have a lot of stakeholders that we need to reach to. And like this platform is one of them to reach everyone. When it comes to like processes of steering committee members, there are few who are going to steer the process, perhaps coming from some of the real stakeholders that are involved in the day-to-day. And I believe the member who is asking this question may not have felt maybe well involved in the process, but I'm glad you are here today. But the stakeholder mapping was very comprehensive, and we were able to reach as much of them.
Thank you, Nancy. Meshach, your question has, I think Nancy has already addressed the issue of pharmaceutical director. And then the other question is, how would you triangulate KDA, Pharmacy Practice Act, and KNPP?
That's an important question. Maybe you can define for me triangulation.
Maybe just relating them and how they relate to each other.
The Kenyan Drug Act, the Pharmacy Practice, what?
For Pharmacy Practice Act, okay, bill, because it's
And
not, there's no act, and KNPP.
Thank you for that. KNPP, if I look at it, it addressed both the practice and the product. It addressed the pharmaceutical products or HPT that we use. And yes, it had spoken very clearly to the strengthening the regulation of the personnel and the pharmacy practice. And both KNPP and the Health Act I mentioned was speaking to separating the practice and product, both KNPP 2012 and the Health Act. So there was going to be born two institutions, the the KDA and the pharmacy practice, where we have the regulation of professionals completely detached from the product, and they are regulated alone. So if you look at the aspect of the bringing them together, the policy should actually proceed to registration. So if we do the KNPP, within it, like we saw, there were a lot of institutions mentioned within it. So those are the, when I was mentioning the issue of self-executing, non-self-executing, so the pharmacy practice was supposed to come as a counsel from the policy. The policy describes what should happen in general and gives a policy direction in every area and what institutions and the structures that are supposed to come out of it. So looking at KNPP being a policy, it was going to give birth to several institutions, some of them being KD and the Pharmacy Practice Council. I think that's where the relation is in terms of how the KNPP was going to give birth to these institutions. But of course, we have seen that it has not yet happened. I don't know if Eunice have tackled that one, if it was a bit difficult for me.
No, it's okay. I think you have explained well. So of course, the KDA focuses on the product, which is the health product. The pharmacy practice looks at the service. Yes. And then KNPP is a policy. So what a policy does is that it guides, it gives direction for a sector. Yes. So like KNPP looks at the pharmaceutical sector or HPT sector and guides, this is how we'll handle this aspect, etc. Then strategies are derived to operationalize a policy. Thank you. So they are related, but of course the scope touches on both the product, the profession, and the practice. There is a question from Gerald on the issue of cadre. Which cadre should head KEMSA, and can it be ring-fenced for pharmacists to head the authority? Okay. Can answer that as well.
That's a very interesting one, a political one. We should go back
Or
to
we
the
can, or Dr. Menge
political
can also
context,
speak to
or
that.
Dr. Menge can be able to tackle it. But just mentioning, because it's been a discussion, if you look at when there was the Director General issue, and I know even us as PSK, we are not comfortable with that actually position being ring-fenced, so that it was only for a certain cadre. And there were court rulings to even open it up to most of the cadres. I think those are some of the areas that make it difficult now to ring-fence your small area. You know, it becomes to and fro. I say this one being open, but on the other side, I say the ring-fence is one for us. I think we are in that space without saying much, but I know our director, Dr. Menge, may be able to, add into that.
Dr. Menge, any additions? I don't know whether he's still on. I think he dropped off. Yeah, but I think Nancy, you have managed to tackle the question. Then I see Brian Machio's hand is up. Brian, you can unmute and speak. Brian, are you able to ask your question? I see your hand is up. Hezron, can someone unmute themselves or?
Yeah, I had enabled him, but I think probably it was accidental.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's fine. So thank you so much. I want to acknowledge the support from Africa Resource Center for this session that we have had. And for the next two, we have walked a long journey with them as a directorate. And we really appreciate, I've seen Dr. Nyinge, and there's active participation from the ARC team. Thank you very much, Dr. Nyinge. I'm glad that you are able to go through this policy, and as Hezron mentioned, please register for the next two sessions. So next week, we'll be looking at to what extent the policy was implemented. In session 3, we'll be looking at what key considerations should we look at as we review the policy. The policy also will be shared with the members, as well as the situational analysis report, so that as we engage in the second and third session, we'll also be getting feedback from you that will guide us as we review the policy. So thank you very much. I hand over back to Hezron.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Nancy and Dr. Eunice, for supporting with the moderation. So I think at this point, I'd like to just, I see our president has joined us today, so I'd like to ask him to maybe say something. Dr. Louis, if you can hear me. So maybe
Dr. Hez for moderating. Dr. Nancy, that was a really wonderful presentation, taking us through that whole, why we had set up the policy, the process of doing that, and just to sort of jog our memories on, and I think even just appreciate how far we've come. So I'm looking forward to the next two sessions. Thank you, Dr. Eunice and Dr. Menge, who was here earlier, for even what you're doing, and also the partners in Africa, APHRC, and PSK. So, asanteni sana. And all members for joining in. I can see we came in good numbers. So we need to be ambassadors of this, and please bring a friend next time. There's usually enough space, so bring two more people each. We need to see like almost the room full. Thank you.
right, thank you so much, our president, Dr. Louis. I'd like to also give a brief opportunity to Dr. Susan to just maybe talk about what ARC does. They are our partners who are supporting this session. So, Dr. Susan.
Yeah, good evening, everyone. So thank you very much, DHPT team.
and PSK for this collaboration. My name is Susan Jogo, and I want to encourage I want to recognize our country director, Dr. Sam. And just to give just a brief about Africa Resource Center, we support the Directorate of Health Products and Technologies in governance, policy, strategy, and we supported them in the evaluation, and now we are working with them in this journey. Our vision is mainly to prioritize the well-being of every person by being Africa's foremost expert on public health supply chain matters, ensuring universal access to basic healthcare. So we are supporting UHC, and we do this by shaping and implementing forward-thinking supply chain policies, partnering with governments and regional organizations to achieve universal health coverage. So thank you very much for the good attendance, and we are hoping that in the next 3 sessions that we'll be able to attend so that in the next session is a deep dive. For each pillar, we get to know the implementation status for the 12 pillars that Nancy presented. And in the third session, we'll be able to discuss more on how we go through submissions. Are we revising the policy? Are we talking about its implementation? And if we are updating the policy, what do we need to consider? So very important, very exciting to actually ensure that we attend the next 2 sessions. So thank you very much, Hezron, and thank you very much, DHPT team.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Susan. Maybe Dr. Samuel, maybe would you like an opportunity to just say hi to our members?
Yeah, thanks, Hezron. I hope you can hear me. Yeah, maybe just to appreciate the great presentation we've had from the DHPT team led by Dr. Menge and Dr. Nancy Jeru. It's been exciting to take stock of how far we've gone in terms of implementation of the KNPP, bearing in mind that it's such a broad policy, that requires participation by everybody. And as ACK, we are happy to be collaborating in this initiative and looking forward to, even further collaboration in transforming the health supply chain and, and the pharmaceutical sector as a whole. So it's been a pleasure and looking forward to the next sessions. And thanks PSK for hosting this and of course bringing on board a critical constituency of the stakeholders who are important in implementation of the KNPP. Back to you.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Samuel. So I think we've come to the end of the session, but just before we close, I'd like to just remind you once again, we have all the 3 sessions on the PPB portal, and the keyword is KNPP. So kindly ensure that you subscribe early, because this will determine how fast you'll be able to get your CPD points. So that's with the CPD points, and we'll be using the same link to register for all the other sessions remaining, session 2 and 3. And if you look down at the poster, we have the link bit.ly pharmaceutical policy. So we'll be using the same link, so ensure that you subscribe again. Then remember, we are coming, the World Pharmacist Day is coming soon, and just like to remind you about our upcoming activities. And the first one is this event by Tana Adi branch. So for the members around Tana Adi branch, we have a walk that will be happening, and later on there'll be a CME that will be happening at Camilla Garden. So for those around that area, kindly make sure you attend. And then we have a 4 series webinar that will be coming up again on the Global Pain Awareness Week. So kindly be on the lookout for that. Then finally, we have the Family Fun Day that is coming up. So if you've not registered, kindly do so in advance. So at this point, I'd like to thank everyone for joining. Thank you to our speakers, Dr. Tom, Dr. Nancy, Dr. Eunice for moderating, Dr. Susan, Dr. Samuel, Dr. Louis, and Dr. Miles for supporting. Thank you all so much, and have a good evening.